is a 2016 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited. But this one is a little more unlimited than the rest of them. That's because this has been converted to 6-wheel drive. Now, Jeep makes some pretty crazy vehicles, but this is far crazier than anything you can get from the Jeep factory. And today, I'm going to review it. I've borrowed this 6-wheeled Wrangler from CNC Motors, which is an exotic car dealership here in Southern California with an amazing inventory that includes everything from million-dollar exotics to cool SUVs to classics. They have one of the greatest showrooms of any car dealership on earth, and you can check them out by clicking the link in the description below. So let's talk 6-wheeled Jeep. This was a trade-in here at CNC Motors, and it was converted to 6 wheels earlier in its life. So I don't know who did the conversion or how. What I do know is that it uses the same 3.6-liter V6 that most Wranglers had back in 2016. I also know that it's insane. And the 6-wheel drive is just one reason for that. Today, I'm going to take you on a tour of the 6-wheeled Wrangler, which is offered for sale by CNC for just under $100,000, and I'm going to show you what else makes it so crazy. First, I'm going to show you around it and show you all of the quirks and features of this bizarre Wrangler. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the 6-wheeled Wrangler with the second quirkiest thing about it, and that would be the fact that it's right-hand drive. That's right, the steering wheel is on the wrong side for the American market, where it was obviously originally sold and where it's intended for. So you're wondering, what's that about? Well, it's a little known fact, but Jeep actually makes and sells right-hand drive Wranglers here in North America. And they do it for the Postal Service. Rural mail carriers prefer to sit on the right side because then they're driving along, they can just reach out the window and put mail in a mailbox and then drive along to the next ranch or farm 5 miles down the road. And the reason they prefer Wranglers is because a lot of these rural mail routes are in places with bad weather. Think about the Great Plains of Montana or North Dakota where big snowstorms are possible. The post office can still deliver if they have a 4-wheel drive Wrangler. And interestingly, if you special order it, you can still to this day walk into a Jeep dealer and order a right-hand drive Wrangler if that's what you want. There's typically a bunch for sale used on AutoTrader. Now the question, of course, is why would somebody turn a right-hand drive Wrangler into a 6-wheel drive pickup truck? That's a different one. Not sure what the answer to that is. Not sure why they went with this instead of a regular left-hand drive one. Maybe they were trying to maximize the insanity. If so, they succeeded. And next we move on to the most insane thing about this Wrangler, which is, of course, the rear wheel situation, because it has 4 of them for a total of 6 wheels. 7 if you count the tire and wheel mounted in back as a spare. Now, the first thing worth mentioning with this is it just looks crazy. Take a look at it from basically any angle, and it just looks far more insane than a regular Wrangler. Everybody sees Wranglers on the street all the time. They don't turn heads at all, but this probably turns everyone's head. It's not too often you see a pickup truck driving by with 6 wheels. Now, like I mentioned before, because this was a trade-in, I'm not exactly sure who did the conversion to 6 wheels or how, but I've done a little detective work, and here's what I think. I'm not sure about the frame. I didn't see any very obvious welds, but that's gotta be how they did it, basically joining 2 frames together to create one longer Jeep. As for the 6-wheel drive, well, it seems to be an illusion. It doesn't look like there's actually a drive shaft going into the transfer case on the rear axle, meaning it isn't a true 6-wheel drive. So it looks like this Jeep is just a 4-wheel drive with the back 2 wheels mainly there for show, at least unless you added a drive shaft to give them power. Now, the result of that that is that when you drive this thing around in normal two-wheel drive mode, it is the middle axle that's doing all the moving. That's where power is going, because the rear wheels on the normal Wrangler are the only ones getting power here. If you put it in four-wheel drive, you would have the middle axle and the front axle doing all the pulling, while these are just pretty much along for the ride. Of course, beyond that, this truck has been lifted for more ground clearance because a standard ride height just wouldn't be enough to go along with a six-wheeled Jeep. So you have aftermarket suspension that brings things a little higher. You also have larger tires than a regular Wrangler for better off-road capability and different wheels for sort of a cooler, more exciting look. But to me, the craziest thing about converting this into a six-wheel Jeep isn't actually putting six wheels on it, it's the bodywork. Because to me, aside from the custom wheels and tires, this thing looks stock. It almost looks like how it could have come from the factory. So how did they do it? Well, pretty much everything you're looking at from your angle is custom. All of this basically had to be either fabricated or figured out from a regular Wrangler. I'm gonna go through some of the more interesting items, starting with this little cap behind the passenger compartment. Now, this is necessary because otherwise the rear seat passengers wouldn't have enough room to actually sit down. The rear seats sit a little bit behind the end of the doors, so they have to put something on to give that extra space to the rear seats. Now, in a normal Wrangler, you can see the cap on the cargo area is normal size. This is standard. You see a million of these Wranglers all the time. Nothing unusual here. But obviously, the one in this Wrangler pickup is half the size. So how did they do it? Well, the answer is they just took the cargo area cap from a regular Wrangler and they shortened it. It was custom made, of course, but they just made it smaller. And the result is these little windows on the side aren't actually windows at all. They're just like plexiglass pieces painted black. You can't see through them from the outside, and you certainly can't see through them from the inside. They almost look like mirrors. It's not actually a window, it's just an illusion. But that isn't the most interesting part of this custom cap back here. That honor goes to the rear window. Because this is pulled straight out of a regular Wrangler, this is the normal Wrangler rear window. And you can see it has a normal rear wiper that you could turn on. It also has hinges, and that means you can open it if you want to. Go into the back behind the seats and you unscrew these little screws. There's one on each side and they screw in pretty firmly in order to keep this in place. But if you unscrew them, you can put down the bottom piece and then you can open up the rear glass just like you can if you're loading cargo into a normal Wrangler, except this time you're creating like a pass-through from the seats to the bed. Now, the cool thing here is that if you want to, you can put back up the bottom half of this pass-through, screw it back into place, and then just your rear window is open in case you have dogs and they want to kind of stick their head out the back. Or in case you want to get a breeze going through the entire cabin, you can open up your rear window and air will pass right through. It's pretty cool. Now, as for the bed, this is also a custom job. They didn't just pull this bed from a Jeep Gladiator. And I say that because it doesn't line up. Behind the door area isn't the same. The placement of the fuel door isn't the same. And also, I think this truck was converted into a six-wheel Jeep before the Gladiator even existed. Instead, I think this bed came from just a regular Wrangler. If you look on a normal Wrangler, on the side panel above the wheel arches, you can see it's shaped in a certain distinctive way. And if you come over to the six-wheel pickup and look at that same panel, it's shaped in the same way, just stretched. So my guess is they just stretched out the cargo area of a normal Wrangler, removed all the cargo area-y stuff, and basically rhino-lined the whole bed, and that's how you get what you see here. For proof of that, look to the very back of the bed. You can see there are little areas where you can store screws. That's where you're supposed to put the screws if you remove the top so you don't lose them, and that's the same place a normal Wrangler has it in its normal Wrangler cargo area. Now, the next interesting piece of bodywork worth mentioning back here is the rear door, because if you're creating a pickup bed from a vehicle that was originally an SUV, what do you do about the tailgate? And the answer is this is just the regular tailgate door from a Wrangler, just like that's the regular rear window from a Wrangler. Normally they'd be together, but in this case, the window is up there, then there's a bed, and then there's this door. So if you have a Wrangler, you're pretty used to doing this. You just push this, open it up, and it's a pretty simple procedure. This is how all the Wrangler models are. And of course, if we're talking custom bodywork, we have to talk wheel arches. You can see this truck has larger wheel arches, obviously stretched to accommodate its 6 wheels, but also widened to accommodate wider tires and make it look better. I think they look pretty good, and again, they look pretty stock. This whole truck basically looks factory, which is why it's so impressive to me. And next up, our next interesting item here, because this Wrangler is lifted, it can be a little bit hard to get inside. So when you open the door, you have power running boards. You can see they automatically go down to make it easier to step inside. Now that's a pretty nice feature. It would be nice to have on more trucks and Jeeps, but it's really expensive to put in. Think several $1,000s just to do it. So it only makes sense on a 6-wheeled $100,000 Jeep Wrangler like this. But anyway, if you want the power running boards to go away, just close the door. They stay down for a minute, but then they go right back up to increase your ground clearance again so you can go off-roading. And next up, another expensive accessory fitted to this Jeep is this external roll cage, which is basically this big black cage that goes around the entire vehicle. Now, people put external roll cages on off-roaders for safety. They're supposed to absorb the impact if you roll over so your roof doesn't cave in and kill you. In this case, I'm not exactly sure how effective it would be, since this external cage is only mounted in 3 places on each side, and one of those mounting points is on the wheel arch. I don't know if it would actually work, but it definitely looks cool, which I think is why most people probably get external roll cages in the first place, if they're being honest. And next we move on to the front of the 6-wheeled Wrangler, where you have a couple more pricey accessories. One is this steel bumper, which is also color matched. It is a very sturdy thing, and it can push pretty much anything or anyone out of its way. Mounted on the steel bumper, you also have a winch, which is a fairly serious thing. Winches are heavy and expensive, so most off-roaders don't use them unless they're going to really off-road their vehicles, or if they want to look really cool. I'll leave you to decide which was true of the person who converted this Wrangler into a 6-wheeler. And next up, our next interesting item with this Wrangler is under the hood. Now, to get under the hood, you don't have a latch you pull in the footwell. Instead, you undo these little clips on the side, and then from there, you just open it up with a latch in front, so anybody can open up the hood of a Wrangler from this era. Now, when you get under the hood, you can see there's actually nothing really interesting under here. This is the same 3.6 liter Pentastar V6 they used in the vast majority of Wranglers from this era, and it's actually too bad, because a V8 under here, a Hemi V8 or an SRT engine, or of course a Hellcat motor, would transform this from regular insane, which it already is, to truly insane, which it could be with more power. And finally, we move on to the interior of the 6-wheeled Wrangler, which is pretty much the same as the interior of most Wrangler models from this era, so I'm not going to go through it in great depth, but there are a few items worth noting. One is all of the little Jeep Easter eggs in the interior. Chrysler has always done a good job of putting little Easter eggs you have to find throughout its interior, almost like they're challenging me to find all the quirks and features. My very favorite is the little graphic of the Jeep climbing the windshield, which you can see at the base of the windshield on the driver's side. You also have a little Jeep headlight and grille graphic at the top of the windshield by the rear view mirror, which is very distinctive and very cool looking. And by the way, one interesting thing about these graphics on the windshield, Chrysler found that when they started putting these graphics on the windshield, people who had windshields break were far more likely to replace a broken windshield with a factory one than some cheaper aftermarket one, because they wanted to keep the graphics. And so that's one reason why they do these little graphic Easter eggs. It's also worth noting there's one more interesting Easter egg in here. If you go into the cup holders, the little space between where the cups would be, you once again have the little Jeep headlights and grille. Something a lot of people wouldn't notice, but if you do, it's a nice little thing that'll put a smile on your face. With that said, one of the biggest things you notice when you get in here, and something I forgot, is just how crappy the interior of the JK Wrangler really was. This was the previous generation Wrangler, and everything in here is so basic, so cheap, feels cheap, looks cheap, is cheap. It is just not a very nice place to be. It's been a while since I've been in a JK Wrangler, and you get in a JL model and you can see just how dramatically Jeep Jeep moved the game forward since it had been so long since they redesigned the JK. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. This is supposed to be like an off-roader or a beach car. You throw the top off, you get sand in it, you put dogs in it. You don't necessarily want it to be nice. So I don't really mind. But if you're looking for like a nice, luxurious vehicle, you certainly won't find that in a Wrangler. And I forgot just how kind of cheap feeling the interior is in the previous generation model. And by the way, one other interesting item worth noting here is that you can turn this into a convertible. The top is removable, just like on a regular Wrangler. The front part is especially easy. You just twist this little latch above the front seats and you can lift off these front panels and drive around with your roof partially off. If you want to take the rest off, it's a little bit more complicated, and I'm not exactly sure what the pickup conversion did to the back part, if it still is completely removable. But this is not just a six-wheeled right-hand drive Wrangler, it is a six-wheeled right-hand drive Wrangler that can be convertibilized. And so those are the quirks and features of the six-wheeled Jeep Wrangler. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the six-wheeled Wrangler. Now, I'm fairly used to driving right-hand drive cars. I've done a bunch of videos with them. I actually have owned two, both Nissans that were imported from Japan, but it's still weird. One interesting thing is a lot of people came up to me while I was shooting this video. They didn't freak out as much about the six wheels as they did about the right-hand drive. Oh my God, a right-hand drive Jeep! Whoa! It's actually not that crazy. You know, Jeep does sell this vehicle in a lot of foreign markets, Australia, the UK, which are right-hand drive. And then there's the postal versions. And like I said, it's fairly easy to find those postal versions. There are a lot of JK Wrangler right-hand drives for sale on AutoTrader if you want something weird. But you shouldn't, because right-hand drive is annoying. So how does the old six-wheeler drive? Well, normal actually. Acceleration was not all that unusual. This V6 was a great engine. I don't know how it is in terms of reliability, but in terms of power and torque, it was strong. Huge upgrade over the old 4-liter Jeep engines, even though those are so durable. They weren't all that fast. Now, in this vehicle, there is a lot of shaking. You can probably see on the camera, just driving down the road, shake, shake, shake. That was common of the JK. I don't actually think that's because this is six-wheeled. The JK is just very, very unrefined. Again, not necessarily in a bad way, because one would argue it's supposed to be unrefined. That's what it was for. Generally speaking, honestly, driving this just feels like driving a Jeep. It's similar to the 6x6 G-Wagon that I reviewed. It just doesn't feel all that different. Obviously, the right-hand drive component makes it feel weird, but the actual six-wheeled extended pickup thing doesn't feel that strange. You don't really think it's odd until you look behind you and you see the two rear wheel arches back there, which is weird. Frankly, it just feels like a JK Wrangler that's been lifted and modified a little bit. It's a good vehicle, but nothing too insane. You do hear some noise coming from the bed back there, some noises in the back that you don't hear in a normal Wrangler. One thing I hate about driving right-hand drive vehicles is lane positioning. If you're used to sitting on the left side, you're used to positioning yourself in the left part of the lane. But when you drive a right-hand drive vehicle, if you try to do that, you'll be half in the other lane. So you have to kind of relearn it. You kind of have to always be thinking about it. I'm actually surprised that I have no complaints really about the driving experience beyond what you get from a normal JK. A lot of times these conversions, when you drive something that's been converted to something else, it feels bad, it feels crappy, not very good. This seems like a well-executed conversion. On the outside, it truly looks like something Jeep made from the factory, and the interior driving around, it doesn't really seem all that different from a regular JK, despite the fact that it has this pickup bed and extra wheels. And so that's the 2016 Jeep Wrangler Very Unlimited. I love custom cars like this, and this really is one of the craziest Jeeps ever made. Even though I would never buy this vehicle, I'm thrilled that it exists. And now it's time to give the six-wheeled Jeep a Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the six-wheeled Wrangler is cool, not beautiful, but surprisingly nice, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Acceleration is slow, and it gets a 1 out of 10. Handling is weak, it's big and lifted and not great around corners, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Fun factor is reasonably high. It's fun to drive and look at and off-road, though the extra weight and size actually probably makes it less capable off-road than a normal Wrangler, at least without the rear axle hooked up, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Cool factor is pretty high. This turns a lot of heads, and it gets a 7 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 23 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. It has the basics, but not much else, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Comfort is below average, but not terrible, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Quality of the interior is weak, but these are relatively robust, at least in four-wheeled form. Who knows about a converted six-wheeler, but I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Practicality is okay. It's got 4 doors and a pickup bed, but its larger size makes it a bit difficult to drive. Plus, there's the practicality of finding body panels if something happens. It gets a 6 out of 10. Finally, value, and this is cool, but is it $100,000 cool? For me, it's hard to believe, and it gets a 5 out of 10 for a total daily score of 25 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 48 out of 100, which places it here against other weird off-roaders and SUVs and Jeeps I've tested. This Wrangler has no real rival, but it's certainly a special vehicle, and I'm glad I had the chance to check it out.